Hey everybody, how's it going? So, today we're going to be looking at the question of moral realism, which is what most people are talking about when they say objective morality. So this video is for total beginners. You don't need to have any other knowledge coming in. Alright, let's start. So this is for when I do it in person. I'm saying please pay attention, it's easy to get lost in this topic. The reason why is because there's a lot of ideas in this discussion that build off of prior ideas. So if at any point while you're watching this video, for example, you feel like there's something you don't necessarily understand, I implore you to pause and to go back, because you may have missed something that will clear things up a bit further. So moral realism is a position in metaethics. Metaethics is the philosophical field of study about moral reasoning and the metaphysics of morality. Right, so questions like, what do right and wrong or good and bad actually mean? Or how does our moral language map onto metaphysical reality? So metaethics is a topic in analytic philosophy, which is a school of academic philosophy which is the dominant in the Anglosphere, in the English-speaking world these days, which originated among certain philosophers in the early 1900s. So analytic philosophy has a focus on clear, literal prose, systematizing views, precise metaphysics, the meaning of language, formal logic, and also interacting with mathematics, natural sciences, and computer science. The founders of the field of computer science were analytic philosophers, people like Alan Turing or Gottlob Frege or Hilary Putnam. So, just as a side note, in analytic philosophy, the term ethics and the term morality are pretty much treated as more or less synonymous by most philosophers. Often, in classes that are outside of the philosophical domain, people will talk about ethics as if it's like the rules and regulations created by society, and morality as if it's your personal taste, and they'll make a kind of distinction like that. But that's not really something that's, defended in modern philosophy, or that was even historically defended in philosophy. It's just sort of an invention of other fields. And I will be using these two terms, ethics and morality, and ethical and moral, interchangeably here. So the first thing to understand about the view of moral realism is that it's quite popular. So 62% of professional philosophers think that moral realism is the best theory we have for metaethics. This is according to the Phil Papers survey from 2020. So most scholarly work in ethics is done either assuming moral realism outright or using concepts and language borrowed from moral realist frameworks. So even if you're not a moral realist, it's worth understanding what this position is so that you can interact with these topics. So, what is the moral realist thesis? What does it actually mean for morality to be real? Well, it's a three-part thesis. I've construed it here as 2 points. The first part is that ethical sentences such as genocide is wrong, or that could even be stealing is wrong, or, helping people is the right thing to do, are objectively true or false. Like, for example, mathematical propositions, like 1 + 1 = 2. And secondly, that we have reliable ways of knowing which ones are true and which ones are false. So this could be through intuition, as many philosophers would argue. This could be through a set of principles or axioms. And this could also be through, for example, for religious philosophers, divine revelation. So why realism? Like, what are the arguments for realism? Well, here's one of them: intuition. This is defended by many analytic philosophers. Pictured, you'll see G.E. Moore, one of the founders of analytic philosophy and moral philosophy in specific. And secondly, Michael Huemer, who is also a contemporary defender of moral realism and intuitionism. So these guys would argue it's a very intuitive position, and that it's rational to use our intuitions and trust appearances when they don't conflict, especially when we can systematize them in productive and useful ways, like mathematics, logic, or the scientific method. And they assert that this can be done with morality. Here's another argument. So many people here might still be thinking, well, it's a bit weird to say there are objective values. Is it really that weird? So, like, for example, wouldn't you believe that systematic analysis is in some sense objectively better than random guessing? Isn't it the case that we should believe the truth? And aren't some beliefs more justified than other beliefs? So these are all values. They're not moral values, but they're what's called epistemic values. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that has to do with justification and analysis of knowledge. And so some philosophers, such as Hilary Putnam, whom you see here, he was one of the founding fathers of computer science as well, by the way, and Terence Cuneo, and Nathan Nobis, these philosophers would say, listen, I mean, because we already believe in epistemic values, it's really not a stretch to say that there are moral values. In fact, it's quite intuitive. So the burden of proof falls on someone who's going against these cohesive models that use our intuition. Now we have moral anti-realism. So, this is the view that at least one of the claims made by realism is false. So moral anti-realism includes non-objectivists, such as relativists and subjectivists. The reading from last class talked a lot about relativism and subjectivism. So you should be familiar with those views. And there are numerous arguments against moral realism and proposed alternate explanations of moral discourse, but right now we're just going to look at one of each. So here's an example of a famous argument against moral realism. This is from the philosopher J.L. Mackie, who was a moral nihilist. And what he said was that the concept of morality itself is very strange, so we should reject it. And as for why he thought it was strange, he said that the idea of there being objective facts out there that give us reasons to do things is quite strange. The existence of there being objective values is quite strange in a scientific, atheist, non-spiritual, what we would call a naturalistic worldview. And finally, that we don't have any reliable purported faculty to sense moral truth, and we all have differing intuitions, really. It's not like mathematics where we can all intuit that 1 + 1 = 2. So, what can we do if moral anti-realism is true? Well, here's one example of a position that a moral anti-realist could take: fictionalism. So, you see, the thing is, we already use fictional stories as metaphors to teach children about values, for example, like The Boy Who Cried Wolf or The Hare and the Tortoise. Sometimes people who aren't religious will make statements like, God loves us all, but what they'll really mean by that is something like everyone is a value, and this would be an example of religious fictionalism. So some philosophers like Richard Joyce here believe that we can just continue moral discourse as normal, and we can still work in a realist framework, being objective and valuing logical consistency, etc., and we can still apply the things we find out in our lives. So, finally, any questions? So, of course, when I do this in class, I'm only going to ask for clarifying questions because I don't have time to sit here and debate the views. But if anyone does want to put forward a view and see what my counter argument would be, or maybe I'll agree with you, they're more than welcome to do that. I made 2 other videos that give a brief overview that goes a little bit further in depth on the different types of moral realism and anti-realism. And if you want a very in-depth explanation of meta-ethics, I'd recommend reading the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So there's a lot of articles there about meta-ethics, many of which were actually written by Richard Joyce, who's on this slide here, who is a great philosopher. So I would highly recommend that resource for anyone who's trying to learn more about meta-ethics. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the Canvas thread, and I will get to them as soon as possible. All right, thank you.